Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Sean Fensky, Editor-in-Chief of Medical Product Outsourcing and moderator for today's program. You've logged on to the MPO webinar, Toolmaking Automated, Hybrid Metal 3D Printing for Precision Tool Making. Before we get started, I have a couple of housekeeping announcements. For those of you who are interested in the information you hear today, once the webinar has ended, or if you'd like to forward it to a colleague, this session will be archived for a year. The archive will be able to be accessed through the MPO website, which is at mpomag.com. Also, we will be accepting questions throughout the presentation. You can type your question into the box provided in the webcast window. We will collect all questions and hold them until the end, but please feel free to type in questions as you have them. To enhance your viewing experience today, feel free to customize your window display. You can move the windows around by clicking on the top header space of each window and dragging them with your mouse. Also, you can activate the closed caption option by clicking on the CC button in your media player. Finally, share your reactions to the content being presented today with the emojis provided. Your feedback will be seen by today's speakers. And now, before I introduce those speakers, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsor, Mantle. Mantle designs and produces the only metal 3D printer that is built specifically for precision tooling. That printer accelerates product development by automating how precision tool components are made. Mantle's metal 3D printing technology delivers the accuracy, surface finish, and tool steel properties required for demanding tooling applications. If you'd like to discover more about Mantle, just click the logo at the top of the page. And now let's get started. Today we're joined by Ethan Righto, Director of Marketing for Mantle, and Hillary Thomas, Vice President of Westminster Tool. Ethan has extensive experience in technical marketing for design and manufacturing products. He previously ran the technical marketing team at Desktop Metal, a 3D printing manufacturer focused on volume production. Before that, Ethan worked on the rapid prototyping team at MIT Lincoln Laboratory, where he worked on the laser communication system for the NASA Orion mission. Hillary rejoined Westminster Tool, her family's business, after working as an international sales strategist. Her experience in leading and promoting corporate change through training programs has aided Westminster Tool's philosophy of hiring for character and training for skill. Today, her focus lies in business development, diversification of technical capabilities, and leveraging the latest technology in the plastics industry for injection molding. Now we'll begin with today's presentation. Ethan?
All right. Thank you for that introduction, Sean, and thanks to everyone out there for joining us and giving us some time out of your busy day today. As Sean mentioned, today we're going to be talking about tool making automated and talking specifically about hybrid metal 3D printing for precision tool making and for injection mold tooling. We have a lot to get through today, but for a brief agenda here, we're going to start by doing a quick introduction to both Mantle and Westminster Tool and introducing you to myself and to Hillary. We'll talk about Westminster Tool's journey with metal additive manufacturing. Talk about how Mantle works. We'll talk a little bit about the product development process for plastics and some of the challenges there that Mantle's attempting to solve. We'll look at an awesome use case that Hillary has recently done about how Westminster Tool has actually done this to help accelerate product development for a leading medical device OEM. We'll look at a bunch of other examples of how Westminster Tool has been using Mantle, some other success stories, and then, of course, we'll be taking your questions and answers throughout, so feel free to be throwing those questions in the Q&A. We also have a bunch of awesome parts printed on our desk here today that we're going to be talking about. So feel free to be looking at both the slides and the camera, but let's go ahead and jump into it. Thanks again for joining us. So a little bit of a quick introduction to Mantle. At Mantle, we are a metal 3D printing company, and we have designed a technology that is solely focused on printing manufacturing tooling. Today, that means injection mold tooling, printing inserts like you're seeing in my hand here. But unlike many other metal 3D printing companies, the only application we target is tooling. We don't do one-off parts or any other applications. We are solely focused on doing this one application because we know we add value and we know we do it well. And we're going to show a bunch of examples of that today and how we've designed our technology to do this. But at Mantle, we are a metal 3D printing company solely focused on the tooling industry.
Thank you, Ethan. Yep, my name is Hillary Thomas, and I work at Westminster Tool. We are an injection mold builder located in Plainfield, Connecticut. We really specialize in Class 101 medical production mold building. Typically anything up to about 32 cavities, really up to 6,000 pounds. We like to make sure that we can sample everything in-house. And really, we focus on complex challenges. So traditional open and close, not necessarily what we usually go after. We're looking for things that are two-shot, micro, multicam, like the example you see here, unscrewing, insert molds, collapsible cores. Really, anytime that there's a complex geometry or tolerance that you're concerned about being successful with, and we really take on the responsibility of building a tool that's going to get you there. Few things unique about us. We are really well known for our culture. Obviously, we really take pride in building high quality tools, but we changed our culture about 5-10 years ago now, and it's really gotten us a lot of recognition. It allows us to be really curious about our customers' challenge and take more accountability versus really making the responsibility be our customers. And it's allowed us to integrate a really hands-on manufacturing process. We do MoldX 3D simulations on every single mold that we build. We do a really robust DFM process. We do sampling, low volume molding for our customers. And thanks to the integration of Mantle, we now do product development with our customers as well. And in the bottom right-hand corner, we have won a lot of awards for our culture and some of the investments that we've made in advancing technology here at WT.
Awesome. Just a quick poll to start things off here, just to get a better understanding of the audience we have here. We'd love to understand, who are you out there? Who are we talking to today? How would you describe your business? So we'd love to get a quick understanding of who's out there today, and we can certainly try to tailor our content more towards that, but I'm sure we're going to have a wide variety of different people on the line here today. So just a quick poll here.
I don't know if it's...
Hopefully is live. There we go. Yeah, see the see the answers flooding in here.
So we'll give this just a few minutes so that we can understand who we're talking to today. And then we'll quickly launch it so you guys can also see who's on the call as well.
Awesome. Getting some good results here. Just give this a couple more seconds here. Some emojis on the screen.
Yeah, we like this emoji feature.
As long as they're positive, hopefully.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Close this out. Awesome. So it looks like we have a good blend of everyone here. Some medical device OEMs, other OEMs, plastic processors, a lot of process processors with tool making capabilities, which is awesome because, of course, we're talking a lot today about tool making, and then some contract manufacturers as well, which is a great plethora of people here. Awesome. Hillary's going to jump back in and talk about their journey with additive.
Yeah, so we have been exploring metal additive since around 2017. With our progressive culture, we really want to make sure that we're staying front of mind with new technologies. Like we saw a skills gap well in advance, and we were addressing that. We also knew that eventually metal 3D printing was going to catch up. We wanted to make sure that we were staying ahead of that. The challenge we had is there was no metal 3D printing technologies that truly took tooling needs into consideration. Everybody on this call has at some point worked with an injection mold. We're pretty special. We have certain accuracy, durability, speed needs. And another thing was that as a injection mold building company, we really didn't have the ability to invest millions of dollars in a piece of equipment that was going to take 2 years to learn when we were addressing a skills gap that already existed. Specifically, we were really looking for something that had accuracy of plus or minus 3 thou or better. As you know, especially when we're living in medical class 101, plus or minus 3 thou in steel is a mile wide. So we're really looking to get as close to 1 thou or better. We wanted to be able to have stable material. So one of the biggest challenges we had is even if something came out within plus or minus 5 thou, by the time I touched it, it moved all over the place, and you were quickly diminishing any value that you had of printing. We know what steels work with tooling and injection molding, and so it was really important that we had familiar steels and we didn't have to reinvent the wheel or have to re-educate our customers or trial new things. In addition, with medical, there's certain materials that are proved to be used. And then lastly, like I kind of alluded to, we don't have millions of dollars to spend. We really needed something that would be on par with the traditional CNC machine that we would add to our shop floor. So we met Mantle in 2019, and we were quickly impressed with the product samples that they gave us. We did a basic machining test, kind of something similar to this that you can see in front of you. We put it through grind, we did some wire EDM, we did some sinker EDM, we did machining, and we were extremely impressed with both the surface finish that we were seeing as well as the accuracy. It was coming off, Mantle comes off the printer after printer and sintering plus or minus 1 thou per inch. And a lot of times we're seeing that or better. There's a lot of the ability to get fine features. Initially, we could get down to a 6 thou corner radius, and now we can get down to a 3 thou. So very similar to what you can achieve with traditional operations that we have currently. Of course, printing allows us to get more flexible and creative with things like conformal cooling channels. Huge thing for us was they were stable traditional tool steels. It was H13 and a P20, and they were able to demonstrate that they had the identical material properties, which was huge, especially when we're working in the medical industry, and extremely, extremely easy to use. While I did grow up in a family business, I have not run a CNC machine before, and I actually run the Mantle machine, and I think it took all of maybe 2 to 5 hours in order to train me on how to utilize it. So just a quick example of something that we did initially. We really were interested in conformal cooling, so we wanted to take something that we had on hand that we had manufactured traditionally. We wanted to add conformal cooling and see how Mantle would hold up in comparison. So that is this insert that you can see on the page. This is it machined, and I'll hold up right next to it what it looks like off of the printer and sinter. And so basically, what you see for part geometry, that is as printed. The only thing we did was put in ejector pin holes. So you can see kind of what the surface finish is there. It's similar to an EDM finish. When we molded it, there was no change. The quality was on par. We did square up the block, machined in primary vents, put in ejector pin holes, things like burned in a subgate, but we didn't touch part geometry. And most importantly, we were able to do that 25% faster than when we had made this same component traditionally. And here are the conformal cooling lines that we had put in it. And this part in particular, it was a huge influence in reducing cycle time by 25%. We also had some parts at the gate, it was burning and causing some quality defects that we were able to address with this as well. So really, once we got into this example, and the biggest thing that sold us was the stability. Off of the printer, we were able to go in and do whatever finish machining we needed to do with little to no movement. There wasn't any stresses left over. With Mantle's process, they're sintering partially along the way. So the final sinter has a much smaller shrink rate, which reduces in a much more stable, less warped product, which was huge. And ultimately, it was why we invested in it. We got our machine last June, so it's been almost a year. It's been about a little year and a half almost that we've had it. And in addition to using it for conformal cooling, we're doing prototyping for customers of high performance materials where they wouldn't traditionally do aluminum tooling. And we're using it a lot for development tools to do faster lead times, trial production environment items such as conformal cooling. And I'll talk more about that shortly.
Awesome. Thanks, Hillary. And yeah, we're going to look at a bunch more examples later on. But I think at this point, it makes a lot of sense to explain how this technology actually works and what makes it so special to kind of deliver on all these features that enable it to be used for all these awesome tooling applications. Mantle's technology is very unique and very different than a lot of other metal 3D printing technologies. We actually start with a CNC. What you're seeing on the left there, it's a robo-drill style CNC that we heavily modify to print our material. It is a two-step process where we're going to use both a printer to print our parts and shape our parts, and I'll explain how that works. And then the parts go into the furnace for densification, and then that's really critical. What makes our process so unique is that we're not starting with a metal powder or a filament, we're actually starting with a paste. And that's what we're printing. This paste has the consistency of about a toothpaste. It's relatively viscous. And what that actually is metal powders mixed with binder and some solvent to allow it to flow. And this is really a lot of the secret sauce of what makes Mantle work is inside of this paste. So every single layer inside of our printer, which is built inside of that CNC that I showed you earlier, we are printing this paste. This paste is just being extruded out of a nozzle. It's actually not even heated when you're doing this. It's viscous enough that just with a pump, it can be extruded through this needle to lay down a layer of this material. What's super critical now is that after every single layer, we are going to dry this paste material. This is going to remove the solvent and actually firm up the layer a little bit. So here we're moving from a toothpaste-like material into more of a dense foam. What's actually happening here is that we're taking the part and turning it into a very high green body density. If you're familiar with powdered metal, you'll know why that's so important, and that's to minimize the shrinkage right here. We're actually packing this powder very, very densely so that when it goes into the furnace, it doesn't have to shrink as much. Another critical thing about this drying step is it's making the material firm enough that now we can machine it. So every single layer inside of this printer, we're going to print, we're going to dry, and we're going to machine. Every layer, we're going to machine perfectly flat. Every 10 layers, we're going to contour mill. Since the part is very soft when we're doing this, it's essentially a foam, and we're taking very small depths of cut. Since we're printing, machining, we can use these really, really small cutting tools that normally you would struggle to use on a tool steel, like a 6-thou ball end mill. We're using off-the-shelf cutting tools, 20 different tool changers inside of the machine, so we can use a variety of different tools to really give you that sharp feature resolution that you would not be able to do with other technologies. Additionally, that's why when you look at these parts, people pick them up at trade shows all the time, and they say they can't believe this is printed. Well, it's a hybrid approach, so we're printing and machining, which is why you don't see those layer lines. It's why the details are so crisp. You want a good example here. The ability to print those really deep ribs because we're printing, machining, which is often what many of our customers are after to eliminate that sync EDM time. I have a quick video here to show how this is actually working because it can be a little bit complicated. But you can see, laying down that paste material, we're just flowing that out onto the build plate. We're going to come through and dry that material, and then we're going to go through and machine. So every 10 layers, or every layer we're machining flat, every 10 layers we're doing that contour milling step to refine the feature resolution. We can even add in shapes that weren't possible to print because we're just going to machine them in. And you can see, obviously, these steps are going to repeat over a couple hours, couple days, et cetera, to build up the part. But all of that, of course, is completely unattended to build up your part. After printing is complete, you're going to put your part into a furnace. This is a sintering furnace. If you're familiar with powder metal or metal injection molding, it's going to get just below the melting temperature of the material. The part's going to shrink about 9% here, which is very low, actually, for sinter-based technologies. It is where we're losing our tolerance, which is why that tolerance is plus or minus 1 thou per inch, because shrinking 9% of a 6-inch part is a lot more than shrinking 9% of a 3-inch part. But the part's going to shrink very consistently. What's going to come out is a part with isotropic material properties. None of that residual stresses because we heat and cool it very, very slowly. And then it's going to be fully compatible with standard finishing operations like Hillary was already showing, but your grinding, your milling, your wire, your sinker, tapping, et cetera, all of that can be done. So if you need to touch up the part, you absolutely can. And I never like to spend too long without an example. And the result of this is that it produces parts that can be used with little to no finishing. For example, this is a good example of a slide from a company, Hypertherm. You can see, what they were after with printing here is all of that complex rib features on the inside of this slide was left as printed. They had to do a little bit of finishing to the outside, but what they were really after was eliminating that sync EDM work. So the result of this, it's great to talk about a fancy, sophisticated print process, but what it really means is faster parts and faster molding and getting tools in the hands of your molders and your tool makers faster to accelerate lead times and shoot parts with little to no finishing. Talking a little bit now, and one application that we've really seen a lot of traction in is to accelerate product development, especially in this kind of mid stage of product development of plastic parts. And we'll talk about, a little bit about this, and Hillary has a really good example about how they've done that. But when we look at the product development process, we see it's very, very fast in the early stages. You're working in CAD, you're working in simulation, you're maybe modifying design every couple of hours. You're getting 3D printed parts in plastic, maybe in an hour or a day overnight, and you're able to iterate very, very quickly, and that's great. But then eventually, that just looking at a part on screen or just getting a plastic 3D printed part is not good enough. And you need to actually validate the function of this part. Here's where we need our end use materials. We need a production representative manufacturing process because that plastic 3D printed part is just not going to cut it when you're going to market and going to produce this in mass quantities because you have no idea how the part's actually going to perform when you move into production. We find that this is especially challenging for highly regulated industries and industries that work with engineering plastics, like the medical device industry, where they have to go through regulation and go through trials and using PEEK and glass-filled materials, acetals, polycarbonates that can't be molded in aluminum or are much harder to process. We see that slow down even more. I put together a kind of a timeline here, but like we just mentioned here, the very, very early stages here, you're moving very, very quick, I should say, iterating hourly almost to really develop, try fast, fail fast in this step. Where things start to kind of break down or start to get longer is during this functional validation. And there's a couple of different processes that we commonly see people doing this with, and they all have their pros and cons. Of course, you could just machine a piece of plastic. That's very fast. It doesn't give you much information about the actual manufacturing process you're going to go to volume with, which is most likely going to be molding, but it does give you somewhat of a material representation pretty early on and pretty quickly. Another option would be a prototype tool like an aluminum tool or even a plastic tool. This is going to give you a better material representation because it is the end-use manufacturing process, but it doesn't do much to tell you about there is still some discrepancies between the tool steel tool and this aluminum tool. And so it doesn't help you validate the process much. Another extreme or another example would be to use a prototyping service like a Protolabs or a Xometry. Those can be very, very fast. You're getting a pretty good material representation, but you're not learning much about the process here because you're not doing the molding yourself or working with the molder. They're really just selling you end-use parts. So not learning too much during this process as well. But these are a couple of the different ways people are usually trying to validate the function of a plastic part in this process. Of course, once that's done, now we need to move into, actual volume production or process validation. We need to move on to steel tooling because we need to make sure that the parts that are coming off the steel tool are meeting all the requirements we need. We're not going to be able to use that aluminum tooling anymore. We're not going to be using plastic 3D printing, that's for sure. And we're certainly not going to be machining parts either. Here, it's very, very slow to produce this tooling, which is why it's often not used in these earlier stages, but you're getting that perfect material representation. These parts are usable for certification, and you're learning a lot about your process as well in the molding process because you're actually shooting parts with a tool steel tool, which is going to be almost identical to what you're actually going to move to production with, or identical to what you're going to move to production with. So if, steel tools are so great, why wouldn't we use them in production? You're getting that end-use plastic material, which is going to be manufacturing equivalent. You're able to use it for certification and trials. Something that Hillary will talk about later is this idea of validating the manufacturing process, validating that the mold's functioning. You're actually able to start to optimize these molding process parameters, things like temperatures and pressures, cooling rates, cycle time, shrink rates. You're learning all of that in this prototyping stage because you're actually doing it with a steel tool. Additionally, they could be used to bridge or in production, ultimately allowing you to de-risk production. And I'm sure for everyone on the line here who's worked with tooling and injection molding, that steel tooling is very, very slow to produce, very, very expensive to produce. It's very, very hard to build. It's often outsourced for a lot of companies because they're not used to working with high hardness materials. So ultimately, it's really just not an option to be working with steel tools early in the production stage, even though there's so many benefits to doing that early in product development. So ultimately, what Mantle is allowing a lot of people to do for the right applications is to work with tool steel tools during the prototyping stage. Mantle allows you to often produce steel tools in prototyping cost and prototyping speed, and Hillary will give some examples of this. I have a bunch of examples of it as well. But ultimately, less time to produce tool steel tools, less cost to produce tool steel tools to allow you to de-risk that production and get involved much earlier in the process with steel tooling to ultimately de-risk when you move into volume. And Hillary has an awesome example of a company that's actually done this recently. But before we move into that, I'd love to know, everyone on the line here, how are you prototyping plastic parts that you're moving to production with today? Feel free to pick a bunch of these examples. But I'm curious of those different processes we just talked about, which ones are you using today?
Yeah.
Awesome.
This is always interesting to me to see who's using what. And I think a lot of times we end up using multiple. That's why we left this so that you could check multiple. You usually might start with just 3D printing a plastic part, machining, something like that. But ultimately, we all need to shoot plastic into a mold in order to understand how things are going to function. So
yeah. And I think, her and I were talking about this earlier, that all of these methods have their pros and cons, and they all have applications. It just really depends on the part and the situation. But They all certainly have their different pros and cons, as Mantle does, and you'll see today for the right scenarios and the right parts. Awesome. I'm going to give this a couple more seconds here. Good engagement today, so thank you everyone for being engaged. Go ahead and close this out. Awesome. So unsurprisingly, a lot of people using plastic 3D printing, which is great. A lot of people also using prototyping tools.
Yep.
Not a lot of people using plastic tools, which is something I've heard quite a bit of, really across the board. I'd love to hear more about other also. If anyone wants to throw that in the chat, I'd love to know what some of these other methods are that we should make sure we're including next time and knowing about. But pretty good distribution across the board here. Awesome. And then at this point, I think Hillary is going to jump into this awesome example, kind of showcasing how they've done this with Mantle.
Yeah, so exactly what Ethan has just spoken about. It's been a really big challenge for us as a mold builder, because typically we're extremely disconnected from that product development phase. And by the time we get a project in our hands, we are kind of stuck with whatever design has been locked in, and we have to figure out how to make millions of these parts with the tool. And so something that we've been really striving to do is get engaged with our customers earlier on in the process, so that we can give feedback and we can help be a part of finding a solution to how to injection mold a component successfully, accurately for millions of shots, kind of keeping that in mind from the get-go. So we were approached by a medical OEM. They were bringing a new device to market. And they had already 3D printed some plastic parts, and they were at the point where they needed to get functional parts in their hands, and they needed to complete some biocompatibility testing. Therefore, they really needed injection molded parts at this point in time. And so all of the other options really weren't a fit, and they needed them to be as close to part print as possible. And that's a really big thing that we work with here is, with Mantle, I can finish Mantles. I can do post machining to get it within tenths. The key is how fast and how affordable do you want your tool to be? So in this case, we were able to kind of figure out what was our most critical areas. We wanted to make sure we had a solid shut off. And just to kind of throw out, because this was a new product that was being developed, we're currently in the production mold build of. The part you're seeing here is not identical. It's representative. So it actually had more shut-off conditions. It had more geometry, and it was larger. So it's a bit more difficult than what you're seeing here. But I really wanted to kind of give you exposure to the type of geometry that this product had, because it wasn't a traditional open and close. And so we needed to do this quickly. As you can imagine, a part like this would traditionally require a lot of EDM, so a ton of electrodes, in order to manufacture this. And this is why Mantle was such a great fit. So what we did, just to give you a little bit of data behind it, is we started by printing and sintering the parts. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what we did to finish them. But we were pretty much shooting for finishing the geometry. We take off what we take off of Mantle. We usually CMM. We get a feel for where everything is, and we decide what we want to touch up. The print took 6 days. That only is about 2 hours of attended time, prepping a build plate, moving it, starting up the printer, moving it over to the furnace, removing it from the furnace. I mean, it's 2 hours or less. It was just under 2 days of sintering. And then we had 2.5 weeks of post process that we did, which include tool making and assembly. And it was 55 hours of time to bring it to completion. What did we do to the blocks after they were printed? Well, one thing that we do always is we square the blocks. So we always leave additional stock around the perimeter, and we are squaring that up either by grind or in hard mill. We were hard milling our primary vents, depending on what the tolerances of those are. A lot of times we're putting those in afterwards. We wire EDM'd our ejector pinholes. We tapped our water lines and bolt holes. And based on the CMM data, we looked at shutoff areas that we were concerned about, and we did some hard mill in those areas to get a strong shutoff. The result, and this is a picture of that representative geometry printed, we were able to manufacture and put parts in our customers' hands within 4 weeks. If we were to have to manufacture all of those electrodes and burn that geometry, I think the best we could have done is 8 weeks, probably longer. And we saved 110 hours of manufacturing time, which is just huge, especially in the case when somebody comes to us and we are already full on the shop floor. It's pretty hard for me to just slide something in like this and take over my EDM department without pushing something else out of the way. So we were able to do this completely unattended other than those 55 hours. And since completing this, we've molded over 7,000 shots for them, utilizing 2 different materials to help them select what material would be in the actual production parts. So the lead time that we were able to get them that was great. The quality is what most impressed our customer. There was little to no flash. All of our critical dimensions were within plus or minus 3 thou. Some were even better than that. But the real value that we gained was the lessons we learned. In this tool in particular, we had some sticking issues. We were able to learn about different surface finishes that we could utilize to help with this, utilizing A-side assist for ejection. We found that the product actually shrunk more in the length. And so we were able to identify that with the customer to integrate into the production tool. In this case, the customer actually had gone through so many trials and really liked the product that they had in their hand, so much so that they said, we're going to change the overall length dimension to match what is currently. But all of that translates into our design time, which we typically take 5 weeks in a class 101 mold design. We're looking at things like, how is this going to shrink? What are our critical dimensions? How are we going to be successful? What are the risks? How can we mitigate them? How should we inject? How should we eject? We're looking at all of that. And we were able to save on almost all of those activities because we did it at this point when we were doing the development tooling. So not only did we make the development tool, we molded it, we learned a ton of lessons, and we were able to save our customer over 25% of the time and cost in their design. It was in this project in particular, it was close to 40%. And this is really where it comes. And then the goal is ultimately, when we go to sample this, we should shrink this production mold build time drastically by having done this activity and been engaged sooner in the project. So this was a really exciting project that we were really excited to have Mantle for. And for us at Westminster Tool, it'd be really difficult for me to give my customers something in 4 weeks with this much EDM.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's a pretty common theme you're going to see across all of our examples today is that want and desire to eliminate and remove that sync EDM process.
Yep.
So to be able to get geometry close, if not all the way there,
yep.
And then just do the little bit of finishing work instead of the hundreds of hours of EDM burning that's so common with these complex tools.
So obviously that's the latest and greatest kind of example for me to show you. And Ethan had a goal today of trying to focus on product development, but I did want to show you some other things that we've done with the technology over the last year. You may have seen this. This is a really great example that we utilized. But basically, there was a compounder that had a new renewable sourced glass-filled nylon that they wanted to release into the market. And they had not molded it yet, and they needed to understand how it molded. And they also wanted some type of medical representative part that they could put in customers' hands so that they could see what the material was like and not be turned off by the fact that it was a new type of material that they hadn't seen. So they came to us prior to a trade show. The trade show was in 5 weeks, and they asked us if we could reverse engineer, create some type of product, design it, make the mold, and mold them 1,500 parts for the trade show. We did that utilizing Mantle. So we were able to get 1,500 parts in their hands within 3 weeks. And we basically just took their needs and designed it in a way that would be perfectly successful for Mantle. So basically we utilized an in-house frame. It was 5 days for us to print and sinter these, 7 days to finish machining. I labeled here everything that we did after printing. So we did not touch part geometry other than we did laser engraving with websites on them for the marketing purposes. But again, we squared up the block, We burned our subgate. We put in our ejector pin holes, machined our primary vents, very similar to the same story of the last time. And we were able to mold flash-free parts that customers have been putting in their hands for over a year now, within 3 weeks. And so it's really important to kind of understand for us, what is a fit for Mantle. So here, especially with the geometry being open and closed, especially with the tolerancing that we were being held to and things like that, it enabled us to do little to nothing after it came off the printer, other than getting a really good fitment in some of the tool components, such as gating or ejection.
Hillary, I'm realizing we don't have any plastic parts with us here, but from the last slide, can you describe the finish you get right off the Mantle surface?
Yeah, so it's similar to an EDM finish. So it's exactly, kind of like a matte finish that you would get, similar to what you get with an EDM. So that's what you're getting. You can polish it if you want. While we're on the topic, you can weld it, you can mold tech it, you can do a lot of things to your surface finish. But it is 97% dense, so it's not exactly perfect, but it's pretty close. And so, but what you see in your hands, it won't be a shiny finish. What comes off the printer, it's very similar.
I think for like, that perfect kind of matte plastic finish, which for a lot of applications is fine.
And again, in both applications, they weren't asking me to hit a surface finish. They wanted a part in their hand, and that was the only reason we would ever polish these is for ejection, really. Another example was a case study we worked on with Pepsi. Traditionally, so they have a prototyping lab, and they're trying to turn around different iterations of bottles very quickly. In this case, they were looking to do like a lightweighting. And I just want to hold it up for you so you guys can see. So this is the base of a blow mold that they were working with, and they were trying to turn around iterations quickly within a week. But after they turned around an initial iteration, if it went well, it needed to go into production simulations where they would run 10,000, 20,000, and they needed to do so to trial their production lines. Would the automation work with it, et cetera? So they were trying to accomplish a lot. And in their existing kind of format, they were using a plastic 3D printed base, and it held the heat a lot. So after a certain amount of shots, it started to get a lot of blushing and the cloudiness that you would see. And so that quality really impacted its ability to integrate with automation. So what we did is we printed them with Mantle. We did very minimal post machining. We ground the top and bottom just for shutoffs, and we hard milled the OD base. And so very little machining that we did afterwards, and this was something that we were able to do. I will say the 8 days was done early on, and when we received our beta printer. Since doing this project, we've reduced print times by about 30%. So this would probably run closer to like a 5 to 6 day print at this point in time. But again, this was a really big way that they not only were able to still accomplish the speed that they needed for the first step, but they were able to utilize that to bridge into their automation simulations.
Awesome. Thanks for those examples. And I just have before we wrap up here, I just have a couple more examples. I looked through all my examples and kind of thought of which ones are relevant to accelerating product development. Another good prototyping tool example here for another medical device component. I actually have it here with me again. You'll see that common theme of those deep features that would require a lot of EDM work. This was actually a tool for prototyping both plastic parts in acetal and radel. So they wanted to use steel tooling here. Radel was molding at high PSI as well as a high temperature. Acetal actually emits a corrosive gas during molding, so the desire was to use some tool steeling here. And they were looking to get, similar to that production representative tooling, production representative parts, so wanted to use that steel tooling here. Here they actually used the P2X material, or P20 equivalent material. This was earlier on in the Mantle process, printing in about 62 hours, of course, all unattended. So in about 2 or 3 days here, went in the furnace for about a day and a half, and then did 24 hours of finishing on these tools, which was finishing those ejector pins, actually doing the tapping on the mounting holes, which are on the bottom surface here, and then grinding it to fit into the mold base. So about 122 hours of total fabrication, which they did in just 8 days, which only 24 hours of that were active. We're hearing a lot these days about labor and the challenges of hiring tool makers, and the ability to be able to do just 24 hours of tool making time instead of hundreds of hours is obviously really, really beneficial in these applications. So ultimately, huge reduction in lead time from outsourcing from 7 weeks down to just 8 days. The amount of active time down from 148 hours down to 24 hours on these tools. 50% cost reduction. The insert was accurate within 1 thou without as printed, without any additional finishing. All the molding surfaces were left as printed. So again, you're seeing that sort of matte finish on the parts here, that D2 kind of Synchro EDM style finish. And then the molded parts passed all their visual and dimensional requirements. Love to look at Mantle in terms of the kind of reduction in steps that are involved here versus a traditional process. So a traditional process, if you've built tooling before or worked with tooling, there are so many steps involved to produce these highly complex and highly accurate tools. With Mantle, we're cutting out so many of those steps. So with here, just very, very early on, the printing step, of course, the wire EDM for those ejector pins, and then that final finishing. So from 148 hours of active time down to just 24 hours of time, which of course dramatically accelerating time to market to be able to prototype production tools this quickly. Another good example here, some slide components here. You can see the 4 different slide components here. Again, huge reduction in lead time here on these components from 12 weeks down to just 4 weeks, a huge reduction in the cost as well. And again, that accuracy is what's enabling this here, the ability to produce all of these slides within 1 thou as printed without any additional finishing to that feature detail. I believe there was still some wire work to fit these into the total tool here. Couple more examples before we wrap up. This is a good example of a part that still required some EDM work after printing, as well as some polishing. This is actually for a dental application, overmolding application, where they're actually overmolding a 60% glass-filled nylon. Here, there was a 40% reduction in lead time. The total operation time reduced was actually from 200 hours down to 110 hours. So they shaved a lot of time off of the tool build. And most of this was the result of removing the EDM. There's a lot of features on this part that would require a lot of Synchro EDM time. It was going to require 100 hours and a ton of different electrodes. They still did some EDM work afterwards, which I'll show you here, but they went from 100 hours of EDM down to just 27 hours here. Really, really important to know that you can do all that burn work, you can do all that finishing work. But as you can see here, they just sort of overprinted some of these features and then just did one final finish burn instead of having to burn all those features from scratch out of a block, which would have taken a lot longer to do that milling and burning process. Which of course, like the common theme today, the desire to remove and eliminate EDM is super, super important. Last example I believe we have here today from Westech Plastics, a great customer of ours in California. This is a good example of where they're actually in process of building a multi-cavity tool for one of their medical device customers. As things happen, the customer decided that in the middle of the tool build, they wanted to make a change, and Westech needed to validate this design change as quickly as possible so the production tool could get back underway. To do this, they wanted to build just a single cavity tool to evaluate this. It's not an overly complex shape as you're seeing here. It's something that certainly could build traditionally, but the value here of being able to just throw this on the printer within an hour, get this printing over the weekend, over the holiday, and not disrupting their normal shop flow to be able to print an H13 tool like this. It only needed a little bit of finishing work to actually get it up and running. So 50% cost savings here. They estimated this would take them about 40 hours to build traditionally, but with Mantle, there was only 10 hours of finishing work, which for them was a huge advantage to be able to have their tool makers not have to spend 40 hours being disrupted on something like this, but only spend 10 hours after printing to do that. Here they were injecting a TPE material, so I always like to include what kind of material was being molded. Oh, one last quick example here, this deodorant core. People are always asking us, is this material as durable as this tool sales I'm using today? It's 3D printing. It's probably going to last for 100 shots or something like that. This is kind of our gold standard durability example that we did with Tessie Plastics. They were actually running a 32 cavity tool for molding these deodorant sticks that are in the center of your deodorant tubes. Hopefully we all used this morning. They took actually 3 of those inserts out, replaced one with a Mantle H13 insert, one with a Mantle P20 insert, and they had one traditionally machined with S7. It's molded in just polypropylene, so a commodity resin, not overly embraced, but it did have some S7 shutoffs along the top here where they were expecting to see wear. But after over 1.65 million cycles, both the P20 and the H13 inserts are still running. The numbers probably, we should reach out to them. That number's probably even higher now, and they didn't see any unexpected wear that they didn't expect to see on the inserts, which is just a great example of how, it's not just a prototyping insert. It can be used in volume, absolutely. But of course, delivering that lead time and cost savings is always the benefit. I think that's all we have for you here. Thanks for sticking with us through that. There was a lot there, a lot of different examples. And thank you, Hillary, for joining us. We're here at Westminster Tool right now, and thank you to MPO for hosting. At this point, I would love to take some questions. Thanks.
Great, absolutely, Ethan, and thank you both for that thorough and informative presentation. Once again, don't forget this presentation will be archived on mpomag.com for 1 year. And now, as Ethan indicated, we'll get to the Q&A. We had a lot come in, so we'll try to get to as many as we can. Let's see, Ethan, the first one we have is, or actually, I'm sorry, this one's going to Hillary. Is Westminster using for production molds or just for prototyping low cavitation efforts?
Yeah, we're using it for both. We actually put Mantle in a production tool recently. We utilized it for conformal cooling and venting. Our customer had a TPE material that they were molding. They had done an aluminum prototype, so we were more or less starting from scratch. And there was a lot of part quality concerns that we had. So we designed slide inserts with conformal cooling and venting in them in order to help us accomplish better part quality. Just to kind of elaborate, in that case, we printed almost as if we had soft milled. So it was kind of had just like roughing of geometry. We then heat treated it to get it to a higher hardness, and then we completed the standard manufacturing process. But we were still able to do that more cost and lead time effective than had we used a traditional brazed type of solution, which couldn't have gotten us exactly what we needed in that application. I will say we have some customers who are molding much more than we anticipated with the components that we've printed, but we only have 2 applications where we put it in production, and that was intentionally designed for conformal cooling or venting.
Fantastic. So next question, what software do you use or recommend for modeling conformal cooling?
I don't know what you guys use internally here.
Yeah, we utilize Moldex 3D. We're a really big fan of the Moldex 3D software. We utilize it for everything in addition to conformal cooling. We can pretty much always get a material card. If it doesn't exist, then we can create one with them. And we've found that the accuracy of what we're able to create in Moldex 3D really closely transitions into what we're seeing when we're actually processing. So we'll kind of model up, usually we model up 2 to 3 different iterations of cooling. First, we want to see if basic cooling, basic cooling gets us there, then a basic conformal cooling, and then an advanced complex conformal cooling, so we can really weigh the pros and cons of all of those different options.
Okay, fantastic. So this one's a short question. Can you print undercuts?
Yeah, so we have some limitations to printing, and it's almost like an FDM style printing where today I believe we're at a 45-degree overhang is our limitation. We don't have a support material today, so we couldn't print, a sheer 90 overhang. One thing that is a limitation today, and won't always be a limitation, is that we can only machine what we can see from the top. So those undercuts would be left essentially rough printed, which would not look at, this kind of machine finish that we're having here. So it just depends on the application, whether it makes sense to leave them rough printed and then finish them afterwards, or maybe it doesn't matter because those surfaces aren't going to be exposed to any plastic, or to, just remove them and machine them in afterwards. So we can do undercuts, but to an extent, it is, kind of application dependent and scenario dependent, but they are going to be rough printed. They wouldn't have been machined, if that makes sense.
Okay. And another question, what is the best surface finish that you can get? Is it in the A's?
Yeah, so you can absolutely polish this material. This is an example of it after polishing. We can polish to an A2, depending on how much material you want to remove. We don't see, as much pitting as you would with other metal 3D printing technology or powder metal technologies. We have not achieved an A1 finish. I'm not actually sure we've even tried to achieve an A1 finish. We're not sure that's possible. From what I've heard about A1 finishes, you look at them the wrong way, and now they're A2 finishes anyways. But you can absolutely polish the material to get a better finish depending on the application.
Okay. Do you heat treat after the furnace too, or does it come out hard? And if so, how hard H13? And can you change the hardnesses to prevent galling?
Yeah, so it comes off around 40 plus or minus 2 rock wall. And you can further heat treat that if you want. I can tell you from our experience, when we're going for speed, we do not further heat treat it. Typically that's sufficient for what we need. And also heat treating just adds another layer of material, dimensional variation that we have to compensate for. So we have heat treated when we're going into production. Like I said, we'll rough out geometry, further heat treat it to get it up closer to 50. And then we'll go ahead and do all of our finished machining. But when we're talking about speed, we're typically taking what comes off of the Mantle process, which is around 40, 42.
Yeah.
All right. How have your customers reacted to this new method of manufacturing injection molds, and how did you introduce this process to your customers?
So, yeah.
Great question.
So I will say there's definitely like a learning curve. Mantle is not, it has not replaced traditional, but it's the closest we've ever seen. So I think the biggest hurdle we've been trying to overcome is trying to not compare apples to oranges. So obviously like polishing, things like that, it's 97% dense. So it's not a perfect A2. It's that surface finish, but could there be a imperfection there? Yes, it depends on what you're running, what the material is, what the geometry, if that's going to be relevant. In addition to educating on good fits. So not everything is magically going to be better, just cheaper and faster because it's on Mantle. So making sure you really have the right geometry where you're going to be able to maximize the value, whether that's utilizing conformal cooling, whether that's eliminating a ton of EDM. But in some instances, we can, hog it out of traditional tool steel just as fast or cheaper. And so it's really been the biggest hurdle has been educating the customers on what's a good fit, which took our team some time to learn. But more or less, everybody has been extremely receptive. A lot of our customers have done at a minimum trials. And I think it's just a matter of kind of figuring out the best way to integrate the technology into a company specific process. With product development, it is a bigger investment than just going to say to proto labs. You're still building a tool, even utilizing a standard frame. You're still doing quite a bit of work. So the value has to be there of learning about doing biocomp testing or learning how a conformal cooling channel functions or learning about shrink. If those things don't add value, you might not need to go all the way to that level right now. And that's been kind of our biggest hurdle. But other than that, it's been extremely well received and people have consistently been pretty impressed with what it can do. And even better is that we can run it very easily. It didn't take 2 years for us to learn how to run it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to that in asking about, mention what is a good fit for Mantle makes sense. And we're certainly not ignorant to think that every tool is the right fit for Mantle. Yep. But maybe can you expand on that and what do you see are the good fits? I know from looking at just what the parts we have in our desk right now, the complex parts that kind of fit in your palm of your hand,
yes.
Things that are not massive. A lot of EDM work involved, hard milling, benefit from engineering resins like glass filled and peaks and things of that nature.
Yeah. So something that you would, if you weren't going to prototype it with aluminum because it would just wear aluminum down too quickly, that's a great fit for this. A lot of EDM, that EDM usually is your easiest slam dunk. If you're eliminating all of your EDM, then you're going to be able to save, if not cost, at least time. Size wise, the smaller, the better. Right now, smaller is better for Mantle. While you can print something 6x6, 7x7, 8x8, the more that you can fit on one print, the better efficiencies you're going to get. This is just like natural. But if I can print a top and a bottom. In my case, I could print 4 to 6 of these at once. Then printing one, I'm going to have a much better ROI. And so for us, that's really why medical has been such a great fit. So many of the medical products that we're helping make fall within that, 4 inches or less in length size. And typically we can print a top and bottom cavity at the same time. Something that needs higher hardness, shorter also. So the print time and cost is driven by your height. So one thing that we've worked with customers on is just because your block traditionally, if your mud frame or your standard frame system requires 4 inches of depth, is there a way to use a spacer block and print only 2 inches of depth? Really just what do you need for your cooling channels or, for manufacturability, and what can you get away with using spacer blocks to reduce that? And this is more of kind of what we've had to educate our customers on, is ways to best utilize the technology.
Fantastic. What are some of the biggest challenges in successfully manufacturing the tools?
I would say one of the biggest challenges we had to overcome was teaching our team to machine something that wasn't flat, square, and parallel. All of our team is used to starting with a block that you first make flat, square, and parallel, and then you put geometry in. And with this and all printed technologies, it's the opposite. You put geometry in, and then you square up the block. And so that was a bit of a learning curve. And we've been working really hard at integrating kind of in machine probing within our 5-axis machine in order to speed up the process of kind of bringing that geometry into center so that we can move it to other processes as needed more efficiently. I would say that's a big challenge. And then just making sure that you're designing, like with any tool, appropriately. Is 40, is that the right hardness? Is that the hardness you want it to be? What's going to wear? That's really been, but I would say getting the team to think outside of flat, square, and parallel was the hardest part of actually integrating this into manufacturing a tool.
Great. What is the typical tool life machining this material?
Of the tools inside of the printer. So the material is quite soft when you're machining it, and they are off-the-shelf cutting tools. So depends on how often you're using a cutter, but
we just integrated on the printer. We just integrated something to kind of help us monitor that wear. I don't have that off the top of my head, but that's a really great question.
But it's longer than a standard tool life, or at least equivalent to a standard tool life, right? Because you're machining essentially a foam material.
Yes.
If anything, the bigger challenge is not breaking some of the really, really small cutting tools, like the 6 thou.
The 6 thou cutter is, yeah.
Yeah. But I know internally we've run tools a month, if not longer, depending on how often they're being used and things like that. But something that you want to keep an eye on, and often replacing a cutting tool to make sure it's sharp rather than messing up a build is a much less expensive thing to do than to run a printer for 4 days and realize the tool wasn't sharp. They are just off-the-shelf cutting tools, so you can source them from anywhere you're sourcing cutting tools today.
I'm pretty picky about costs, so I feel like if it was a problem, I would know about it, but I don't have the specific answer for you.
Okay. Any special waterline cross sections required?
Yeah, and that goes into that overhang requirement. So we do recommend a teardrop shape, which allows for that 45-degree overhang to ensure that the channel doesn't collapse. Because if it was too large and there's too much overhang, that piece is going to droop down and compromise that channel. So like other 3D printing processes, we recommend that teardrop shape. So you would undersize your inlets and outlets, and you would just drill and tap those, and the rest of the channel would be that teardrop.
Okay. After sintering H13, is this finish machined from this point, or is there a separate hardening/tempering process required?
I think we kind of alluded to that, but it comes off of Mantle's process, which is the print and sinter around a 40. And you can further heat treat. We've done up like 48, 50. So you can if you want to. Again, it really just depends on the application and the value of that.
Yeah, so certainly can heat treat it, but they're totally usable, cut right out of the furnace.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What happens when a cutter breaks during the build?
Yeah, I can speak to this.
Please do.
So when we first got our beta, it didn't always pick up on that, but that was part of the beta, was we fixed that problem. So basically the machine is actually taking a photo along the way. And over the last year and a half, we've been integrating all of these like smart technologies to recognize when there's a problem. So right now it will flag me to say it's broken, the print has stopped, so that it doesn't ruin anything. And then I can actually restart the print and just go back a certain amount of layers so that I don't have to scrap the print. And let's say I'm 5 days into a 6-day print, I don't have to scrap that. I'll just go back 3-4 layers just to kind of get back to a flat surface, make sure there's no errors or anything, and then rebuild from that state.
Awesome. I just want to add here, I know we're running low on time, but if we don't get to your question, please feel free to email me your question, and I'll follow up. Just want to make sure that if we don't get to your question, that I get it answered at some point.
Yeah.
So just for everyone out there, we got a bunch of questions here. So
it's a lot.
And if for anything else, you can feel free to email me
And we'll also, not sure which of you will, but both Ethan and I, Mantle and Westminster Tool, will be at MD&M next week in California. Do you know the booth number?
3889 in the plastic section of the show. So if anyone's at MD&M, please come by and see a lot of these parts in person. I'd love to chat. Great to see you. That's a great show. We're really excited for that.
Yeah.
And Ethan will actually be getting all of these questions, so he should be able to address them directly without you emailing. But feel free to email anyway.
Yeah.
Ethan, maybe this is a good question to wrap up with then. What is the approximate cost?
Sure. Yeah, we're very upfront about our costs. Systems designed to be equivalent to high-end CNC or EDM equipment shops are used to buying. Printer is $230,000. The furnace is $120,000. The reason we separate those two out is because we have customers actually who have multiple printers but only one furnace. You can put a bunch of parts in the furnace at once. So if you had a few printers, a furnace could support that. So long-winded answer, but we're roughly all in for about $350,000 plus some installation and accessories. So again, it's not $1 million metal 3D printer, designed to be similar to a lot of the equipment you're already buying to produce H13 inserts with little to no user input, which is pretty incredible.
All right. Well, as Ethan said, unfortunately, we are out of time. We have a ton of questions still. Ethan will get them all. And again, as he said, they will be at MD&M West next week. So I'd like to thank both of our presenters, Ethan Right-Toe and Hillary Thomas, for their insights. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Mantle, for its support. Finally, I'd like to thank you, the viewer, for attending this session. I hope you found it to be a valuable experience.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.